In this tutorial, we'll take you through the steps in creating this social media post design. Let's create a new file with the following settings. Let's import our files for the project. So these are all the assets we'll need for the project. So let's start with creating the background. Let's start with creating a solid color with this X color code, as you can see here. First of all, let's hide all the assets with the exception of the color code. Let's start with the background image. Let's resize the background image. Let's increase it a bit. Okay, let's add a Gaussian blur to the image. With the 9.6 radius pixels. Let's change the blend mode of the image to soft light and reduce the fill to 68, or let's say 66. Let's add a noise to the background, a texture to the background by creating another solid color with this X code. Let's reposition it. Let's rasterize that layer. Let's change the blend mode to soft light. Let's add the noise to the layer by going to filter, noise, add noise. Let's say 10. To see the fill of the texture, let's zoom in so that we can see. As you can see over here, the texture has been changed. Let's regroup all these layers and rename it as background. Let's introduce the photo. Let's resize it. Okay, now let's add some lighting to the background. First of all, let's change our foreground to this color hex code and that to this color hex code. So let's create a layer for the lighting. Okay, with the brush tool selected, let's brush over this area of the canvas. First of all, let's hide our color code as we wouldn't be needing it anymore. Now let's change the blend mode to soft light. To screen rather, let's change it to screen. Let's resize it. Let's resize the layer. Now let's see, this is the lighting that we've added to the side, so to cast a reflection on the image. Let's create another layer for another light, but this side we'll be applying it on this side of the canvas, also with the same color code. Let's select our brush tool and paint over this area. Let's change the blend mode to multiply. Let's darken it a bit by pressing Ctrl U and changing saturation to -68. Okay, at this point, let's see if you can darken a bit the background a bit by adding curves. Let's add curves. Let's pull it up to this side. Okay, so now let's go back to the image. Let's zoom in a bit. Let's see if you can add a let's reposition a bit of the lighting added to this section. want to push it a bit to this side a bit. Yeah, it's appreciable at this level. But with this lighting, let's see if we can add a Gaussian blur to it. Let's increase it a bit so that, yeah, so let's say 111.1115 is okay. Let's add a bit of reflection on the hair of the lady. So let's use that. Let's create another layer for that. Let's increase the size of our brush, also using the same color S code of this. Let's bump it a bit. Let's change the blend mode to screen. Let's create another layer and also add a bit of a lighting on this side of the image of the lady. But this time let's darken it a bit with the hue and sat. Okay, with this codes, with these settings. Okay, now let's regroup all the reflection on the lady together with the picture of the lady and rename it as photo. Now let's start with our text. Let's introduce our text. So let's change the font. Let's change the fonts. Let's change the fonts to black signature, and let's change the color to white. Let's increase the size of the font. Let's reposition the fonts to be on top of all the layers. Let's zoom in a bit. Let's see the option for the text. Let's make sure that standard ligature is activated on the font. Let's make sure that it's activated. Also, let's change the kerning of the font a bit. Okay, let's leave it at 25. Let's see. Leave a negative 25. Okay, now let's introduce more fonts. This time around we will change the font type to Nexa. Let's see, Nexa bold. And also let's change the color to this Xcode. Let's see the option for this text. Let's introduce some stroke to the text. Let's move the option dialog box to this side. Let's use the outside settings and let's increase the size of the stroke. Let's say to 21. Maybe 21 is a bit high on the side. Let's reduce it to, let's see, 18 and see. Okay, let's also add let's change the color of the stroke to white. Let's add a satin. Let's see. Let's change the blend mode should be multiplied, but let's change the color to, let's say, yellow. Let's see. Yeah, and let's also increase the size. First of all, let's resize the canvas and move it on the side so we see what we're doing. Let's swatch this side and let's see. Let's change the color of the distance. Let's see. Let's leave the distance as okay, let's zoom in to see what we're doing. At the same time, the screen side is not allowing us to see what the options that we have. But let's see. Let's zoom in a bit to see the changes that we've effected, but we can see it on this side. Now let's just accept it and see what options we have. Let's reduce the size of the text. I think we can still work. We can reduce the stroke a bit. Let's reduce the stroke to, let's say 10. Let's see if we can still work on the font. Okay, let's duplicate it and rename it to donuts. Let's increase the size of the donuts, and let's reduce the size of the double. Let's place the donuts text beneath this side. Let's see. Let's at this point, let's see if we can add a bit of a shadow on the double text by clicking here. Let's introduce a drop shadow to. Okay, let's see if we can play around with the shadows on the double by moving it. As you can see, where we can move it around even without using the options over here. So let's see that we can place it at the right place that we need it to be. But these are the settings that we'll be using for the shadows on the double text. Let's accept it. The delight fonts, I think we can change the color of the delight to the background. Or let's use this color Xcode. Or let's say let's try the yellow and see. I think the yellow will be appropriate. Let's accept it. Let's resize it. Place it here. I think you can also introduce some shadow to the delight so that it pops up. Let's move the dialog box a bit and let's play with the shadows over here. Yeah. Let's accept it. Let's reposition the delight, let's say on top of all the text. We can move, let's select both the double and the delight text and move it up a bit. Let's move it up a bit. I think it's appropriate at this time. And let's create a square for another text at this point, at this side. A white box to contain another text without a stroke. Okay, let's double click. Let's duplicate this rectangle. Let's duplicate it by pressing and holding Alt on your keyboard to duplicate it. This time around we'll change the color to black. Let's reposition it beneath the white and pull it down a bit to this point. Let's press Ctrl T on your keyboard to transform it. Let's press this to get our options. Okay, so we'll change it to arc, and now let's change the settings a bit down to this level. Let's accept it and use the filter to make it add some blur to it. Let's rasterize it. Let's accept the options here, rasterize it. but we can reduce the radius to, let's say, 2.9, and then now let's push it up a bit. We can also reduce the opacity a bit. It's a bit dark. Let's accept it by 73. Okay, now we can now introduce our text. Now let's zoom out to see what we have so far. Now let's add another text. Now let's change the font to Nexa. Nexa bold. Let's see the options for the text. Let's transform it to caps, all caps. Now let's reduce the size. Let's zoom out to see what we have done so far. Let's reduce the size and position it on top of all the layers. Let's move it to this side. Let's reduce the size a bit. Accept it and position it on top of all the rectangles. Let's see if we can, let's reduce the size a bit. Let's change the color to I think to the orange. Let's see what we have. Okay. Yeah, it pops up over here. Now let's see what we can do to, I think the options we have for the light, the double. Yeah, let's go to the effect over here and see if we can change the certain options that we have for the settings. Let's invert it and see what we have. Let's invert it by unchecking. Let's uncheck the invert. Okay, I think this is okay. Now let's tidy up our layers a bit. Let's select all the text and rename it and group it and rename it as text. The lights too, let's select it and rename it as lights. Okay, so at this point, let's see if you can reposition all the text. Let's zoom in up a bit. Okay, at this point I think it's okay. Now let's introduce our donuts. Let's place it on top of all the layers. Let's select the magic eraser tool to remove the white. But before that, let's first of all change it, rasterize. Let's rasterize that the donut, the picture of the donut, before we can do that. So with the magic eraser tool, let's remove the white background. As we can see, we've already removed it. Let's resize it and position it here. Let's duplicate it again and position it on the left side. We can also resize it a bit. Okay, now let's convert all of them to a smart object and add a motion blur to it. So let's use the motion blur and add it to the donuts. Sorry, motion blur, photo, blur, select motion blur. With these settings, let's duplicate the settings and apply it to the second donut. As you can see over here. Let's apply a bit of a brush yellow on top of all the layers, on top of all the donuts. With our yellow, with our X codes, with this X code, let's apply a brush of yellow on it. Let's create one for the other side and apply a brush of yellow here. Okay, let's see if we can change the option to, let's say, screen. Let's see, screen. Yes, let's do that for the other one too. Let's change the option to screen, the blend mode to screen. Let's zoom in a bit. Okay, with this selected, let's regroup all the donut layers together with the light we added and rename it as donuts. So let's add a bit of, let's see if we can increase the size of the photo. Yes. So now let's position the text or the text layers. Let's position it up to this point. Yeah. So at this point, we can also add let's add a bit of information beneath the canvas using the rounded rectangle tool. Let's change the color to, let's look at the options. Let's change the color to this Xcode and remove the stroke around it. Now let's see if we can work on the roundness of it. Let's push it up to this. At this point, okay, we are happy with how rounded it is. Let's also add another rectangle to it. But this time we'll be using a yellow color for the, let's choose this yellow. This is the Xcode for the yellow. Okay, now let's clip max it onto the previous rounded rectangle. Okay, let's zoom in a bit. Okay, now let's introduce our logo. Let's place the logo here. Let's zoom in a bit. Let's add another text for the logo using the next text. Say logo and just say logo. Let's look at the option for the text, and now let's remove the all caps and change the color to yellow, to white, sorry. I think if lost a bit of a, let's add the L part. Okay, now let's resize it and position it here, right here. Okay, so now let's add some text to by saying for let's say place. Let's change the size of the font. Let's reduce it. Let's zoom in up a bit. Let's say place your orders by calling so place your orders by calling. Let's put it here. Let's duplicate that text and put in some numbers here. Let's say 99. This is just a random number that I'm using. Okay, let's change the font to Bebus. Bebus regular, and now let's italic. Let's make a bit of an italics. Let's increase the size a bit. Now let's zoom out to see what we have done so far. I think you can get some WhatsApp icon and place it here. Okay, so let's place our WhatsApp logo on the side. Let's increase it a bit. Let's zoom out and see what we have done so far. Okay, now let's place this text a bit here. Let's reduce the size. Okay, let's increase the size rather so that it's a bit visible. Okay, so far this is what we've done so far. Let's see if we can add some adjustment to make the image pop out. First of all, let's regroup. Let's tidy our layers. So before we do that, let's add some drop shadow to the rectangle. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, I think let's zoom in a bit to see what you have. See if you can. Let's lighten it a bit. Let's zoom out. See. Oh, okay. Okay, now let's accept it. Let's regroup all the layers here. Let's rename it. Let's undo what we've done. Let's remove the grouping. We mistakenly selected some layers we shouldn't have. So now let's group it and rename it as info. I think if we left out some other, let's undo this. Let's select. Okay, let's regroup it again. This time rename it as info. Okay, let's add some adjustment a bit to it. Let's start with the selective color and increase the reds 64. Let's add a bit of a vibrance to it. Vibrance of, let's say, plus 80. And also a color lookup of gray strip. Let's see, let's reduce the 4 to 50 or 55. It's okay. So at the end of the tutorial, this is what we have.